On the night of July 24th, 1984, at the Indian Point nuclear power plant along the Hudson River, 12 armed police officers witnessed a craft the size of 3 football fields descend and hover over reactor number 3. It was dead silent, no engine noise, no rotor wash, just hovering. The craft, again the size of 3 football fields, stayed there for more than 10 minutes. As the craft approached, every part of the plant's security system went offline. Every alarm, every sensor, everything. This wasn't a one-night freakout. This was one incident in a wave. More than 7,000 documented sightings over the course of a decade. Craft the width of football fields that could go from a still hover to 5,000 miles per hour instantaneously. And this all happened just north of New York City, in the suburbs, along the Hudson Valley. I grew up 40 minutes from Indian Point, and that's only 2 hours from where I'm now standing in the Catskill Mountains. I had no idea any of this happened until I read the book. That book is Night Siege, the Hudson Valley UFO Sightings. It's co-authored by J. Allen Hynek. Hynek was the astronomer that the Air Force hired to debunk UFOs during Project Blue Book, to tell people that what they were seeing were weather balloons or swamp gas. Then the evidence piled up and Hynek became one of the most credible voices to insist to the public that something was indeed happening. Night Siege is the book that Hynek co-wrote about what happened in the place I call home. I'm Tim Stone. I'm a lawyer. I began my career as a prosecutor, and I'm also an author. I started this channel because I walk these woods in the Catskill Mountains, and I revisit the books that broke my worldview, and I try to ask better questions. Today, we're walking through part 2 about Night Siege and going into witness accounts, the extraordinary things that people saw. Welcome to Catskill Liminal Walk. In this episode, Catskill Liminal Walk will be more like Catskill Liminal Sit. That's because I want to sit in my living room and be able to read verbatim from witness accounts about this UFO wave. We're going to start with witness accounts attesting to the often extraordinary attributes of the craft observed in suburban New York and Connecticut in the early 80s through the mid-1990s. This includes things like size, shape, colors, sound or often lack of sound, and other characteristics. This also includes UFO flight performance. How fast were these things moving? Or how slow were they moving? What did people see? A quick request, the YouTube economy runs on people pressing some simple buttons like and subscribe. It's totally free and takes probably 2 seconds at most. If you enjoy this content, I'd really appreciate it if you consider pressing those buttons. Starting with the first witness, named O'Driscoll. O'Driscoll said the object was, quote unquote, bigger than my mother's house, maybe 200 to 300 feet from tip to tip. She said the underside reminded her of bridges, explaining the heavy metal part and then the crisscross effects, the diamond-shaped work with tubular things here and there. Another witness. It continued to approach me, and I just stood there, transfixed. It stopped 40 feet from me and was hovering 20 feet above a telephone pole in front of my house. It seemed to be about the width of a football field and was a dark, very gray metal. It was so close you could hit it with a baseball. The next account. They noticed a series of white lights hovering about 300 feet above the road ahead of them. The lights were in a boomerang pattern and were red, green, blue, and white. They were so bright they lit the tops of the trees. Holtzman, one of the witnesses, stopped and got out of his car. The strange thing about it, he told us later, was the object made no sound. It just hung there motionless in the sky. It was like seeing a ghost. A later witness said, it then hovered there about 20 seconds, and I could see a mass that was very large. Behind it, behind the lights that is, I could see a large, solid object. There was still no sound at all, and I'm saying to myself, this can't be happening. What's happening here? Here's another witness named Elaine. It was still some distance away, and then all of a sudden it just appeared. I don't understand this part. It just appeared over my car. It was as if it jumped from one place to the other. Continuing.
This time the object was hovering, she said. It passed in front of the moon, and I saw a massive superstructure that appeared to be enormous, 6 stories or more high, very heavy. It suddenly moved and disappeared. This next witness was driving a truck. It was heading right for my truck, losing altitude as it approached. Then it slowed down, and I knew it was not going to hit me, but I was still scared. This was a massive boomerang with white, red, and green lights all along the wing section. I felt like whoever was in the ship was looking to follow my truck. The object traveled overhead for about half a second, and then it was gone. This really blew my mind. It was like it vanished in thin air. Here's a witness named Silbert. As we approached our street, Silbert said, we all saw a V-shaped formation of lights. I drove to a clearing and stopped the car and got out to look at it. I was standing outside the car alone, and this craft came over the trees, just clearing them. It came straight for me. It seemed to be about 25 feet above the trees and moving at a speed of about 45 miles an hour. This is interesting. If there is such a thing as a flying city, this was a flying city. It was not a small craft. It was huge. This next account involves a police officer, an active duty police officer. The officer turned his spotlight on the object, and as he did, the object projected downward a brilliant flash of white light that engulfed the officer and about 10 other witnesses. This thing is shooting a beam of light at people on the ground, including a police officer. It's amazing stuff. It was as if the UFO had seen me and moved toward me, the next witness said. It stopped and hovered about 500 feet above the road and 60 feet from where the witness stood beside his truck. It was huge. I had to shield my eyes from the lights because they were so bright. Then it started moving directly toward him, all the time making no sound. And the witness named Purdy got plain scared. He opened his door just as the UFO hovered directly over him. The many colored lights reflected off his windshield. It was so bright that it was a whiteout, Purdy said. He could see nothing but the white light he was bathed in. The light stayed on for about 3 seconds, and he felt heat from it. It was as if a microwave oven was just overhead, he said. I'm wondering if this witness got radiation poisoning of some kind. I mean, these encounters where people are getting beams of light shot at them, and he's saying it feels like he was baking in a microwave oven, as pleasant as that sounds. This next account allows for some ballpark calculations about the approximate speed it was moving. The witness says, after several seconds, the object continued. It was overhead initially. It went slowly at first, then all of a sudden it shot off and was lost across the horizon in 2 seconds. As the authors of Night Siege write in the book, no aircraft is able to shoot off the horizon from a standing start in a couple of seconds. So I did some Gen AI research on this to try and get an understanding of how fast a ship, an aircraft could be moving if it shoots across the horizon in the way it's described in Night Siege here in this instance. And this wasn't the only person to describe this in the blink of an eye, shooting across the horizon when people had a view, a vantage point that would allow them to see that. Other people said the same thing. So I talked to Claude. He's a good dude. He said, the distance to the horizon depends on altitude, but for an observer on flat ground, which was the case here, the horizon is roughly 3 miles away. If the object started directly overhead and escaped visibility in 2 seconds, that would be 1.5 miles per second or 5,400 miles per hour, which is roughly Mach 7. Claude gave me some context. The experimental rocket, X-15, topped out at Mach 6.7. No operational aircraft comes close to Mach 7, or at least operational aircraft of which we're aware. I think we probably do have something to that effect now, and we may have had it then, but I don't think this was a human craft. If the object started at a higher altitude and the observer tracked it to a more distant visual horizon, the numbers only get more extreme. An additional wrinkle is that this ship essentially moved from a standstill to this speed, to 5,400 miles per hour. It was drifting very, very slowly in the sky, but for the purpose of this calculation, for these estimations, it was all but standing still and shot off at this unbelievable speed. So I put that into Claude to do some research on that, and that's an acceleration of roughly 390 Gs to be able to go from essentially a standstill to the speed it would take to escape visibility, to fly away, shoot across the horizon in 2 seconds. As Claude said, even the most hardened unmanned military airframes are designed to handle maybe 30 to 50 Gs. This would have been 390 Gs. A bullet, in contrast, experiences about 1,000 Gs. So this is far closer to a bullet in terms of Gs, the G forces acting upon that object at the speed it was going. This just underscores, I mean, these are, in the Hudson Valley case, we're talking about a football field size boomerang type object floating through the sky in suburban New York. It just really underscores that this is some form of propulsion we don't understand, that doesn't operate based on our understanding of physics, because given our understanding, this thing would implode. It would not be able to withstand that kind of acceleration, something so big, a craft that big. Here's the next witness. We could see a large array of 6 lights that seemed to be connected by some sort of structure that was partially illuminated by the lights. The lights were in a half circle and at that time were steady and bluish yellow in color. There was no sound. We stopped the car and the object began turning toward the west. It then flipped up on its side and turned like a Ferris wheel. We didn't know what it was. We had no explanation, especially for the way the object turned on its side and revolved. Multiple witnesses described this. They compared it to a Ferris wheel where it would be standing horizontally, kind of like a pancake, and then it would tilt, rotate on its side so it looked like a Ferris wheel standing vertically. That must have been an unbelievable sight to see something the size of a football field or bigger behave like that. Another witness said, it blocked out the entire sky above us. It was much larger than a C-5, which at the time, I'm not sure if it still is, but it was the biggest aircraft in the world. And I would have to tell you that you could probably put several C-5s inside this thing. The witness said, there's no doubt in my mind that this was something from another world. The object then flipped on its side and seemed to roll in the sky. It looked just like a Ferris wheel. So this is another person comparing this gigantic craft to a Ferris wheel. And it just is amazing. I mean, the idea of something so large that it blocks out the sky above you, it's hard to envision. I mean, you can think back to the film Independence Day, and the idea of something blocking out the sky entirely above you, something the size of an aircraft carrier. But it is, it's amazing to think about and makes my imagination run wild. Another witness said, the UFO covered a large section of the sky and appeared to be less than 700 feet in the air. As the men continued to watch, the bottom opened up and a smaller, disc-like object came out. It was a dull red color and about the size of a small car. The red disc flew a short distance behind the larger object and then went straight down in a field across from the witnesses. They thought it was going to crash, but to their surprise, it just went through the ground like a ghost. It was as if the ground wasn't there at all. There was another witness who described a similar event with an object detaching from a larger object. Again, the Mothership and Cub or Scout ship phenomenon. This witness said, 2 of the red lights dropped down from the group and went in a different direction behind the mountain. One came back and the other didn't. So you had this single craft with a bunch of red lights on it. Suddenly, one of the lights appears to detach itself from that craft and go shoot off, or in another direction. 2 of them detach themselves. They go shoot off. One disappears, never comes back. The other, like a boomerang, kind of goes around and comes back to the ship. Here's another witness attesting to just the speed at which this thing was moving. We tracked it back and forth from the causeway to the dam, but each time we lost it for a second behind the trees, it would then reappear on the other side of the causeway, just above the trees. It did this several times, then sped up, made a sharp 90-degree turn, and shot off into the sky, like the Starship Enterprise going into high warp. In my opinion, it was too large to be a plane, and it moved like one solid object. This next account is a longer one. It involved the Indian Point nuclear reactor. It's a nuclear power plant in a place called Buchanan, New York, which is near the city of Peekskill, New York, along the Hudson River. This is a pretty astonishing event. The authors had just taken part in a radio talk show on WNBC in New York City. At the end of the program, the host had given out the author's phone number for people to call if they had sightings. And naturally, the phone began to ring almost immediately after the radio show. One of the callers identified himself as a 35-year-old New York State Power Authority police officer at the Indian Point nuclear reactor complex, as I said, in Buchanan, New York. Now, this is amazing. The officer said he and 11 other officers had seen the UFO while on duty at the reactor. I mean, think about that. That's a dozen officers whose job is to guard this nuclear critical infrastructure who had this experience. This is pay dirt if you're a UFO researcher, for sure. On the night of July 24th, 1984, the UFO hovered right over one of the reactors at Indian Point for more than 10 minutes. This was fewer than 20 miles from another sighting that same night that had been videotaped in Brewster, New York. It was also consistent with independent sightings in Peekskill that night by witnesses who told the authors they'd seen the UFO hovering over the reactor area. So we've got various accounts occurring near or directly at the nuclear power plant, corroborating accounts of other people that are reported independently about activity that same night. The guards saw something hover less than 300 feet above the exhaust tower in reactor number 3. As the officer described it, stars were blocked from sight as the object moved to a few hundred feet from the tower. And I quote, "It looked like an ice cream cone. You could see it was a solid body about the size of 3 football fields." So as a frame of reference, that's 900 feet, and that would be about 200 feet short of an aircraft carrier and about 183 feet short of the Eiffel Tower. But that gives you a sense of the proportions of this thing. It was directly over our heads, and we were looking up at it. It had to have been going slower than 5 to 10 miles an hour. They said they watched the object for about 20 minutes, including 10 minutes with it over the reactor. The officer said, "At one point, this thing got to within 30 feet of the reactor. On that night, there were winds going up to 30 knots an hour. Yet, as the witnesses recounted, this gigantic monstrosity was crawling or standing still." The officer continued, "We were all standing there with our mouths open." I imagine I would be too. "We were in awe of it. If the thing stayed over us, the order was already given to get ready to shoot it down. We had shotguns and were waiting for the final word to fire on it. It was one solid structure and very large, and they were videotaping it. We had it on camera for about 15 minutes. I was trying to think of some logical explanation for what it was, but I didn't know. Like others, the officer compared it to a C-5. It was larger than a C-5, he said, which is the largest aircraft in the world and has a wingspan of 212 feet. This was much larger. He said it seemed very brazen. It acted like it didn't care who saw it. Amazingly, like other incidents with UFOs hovering over nuclear equities, there was interference. The UFO caused interference in various systems and the operation of the power plant. The officer said, as the object approached the east gate of reactor number 3, the nuclear plant's security system and the entire alarm system shut down. Sensors that detect movement shut down. Inside the security console, the computer that controls all security and communications systems shut down. At that time, the commander contacted Camp Smith, a New York National Guard base less than 10 miles away, requesting identification of the object. No answer was given. A request was then made for an armed helicopter to shoot the object down. Before the command was given to launch the helicopter, the UFO moved away. The next day, the commander of the security guards informed them that, quote unquote, nothing happened, and the event was to be forgotten. A videotape of this incident very likely exists, based on the account of the officer and his statement that all the security cameras automatically record everything they see, even though in this case, some of these cameras were likely shut down by this craft. However, the authors of Night Siege requested that footage, and they were told that no such tape exists. It's interesting that in the days following the incident, the officer said that officials from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission visited Indian Point plant.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, as mentioned, the prior episode dealt with analytics based on the data set compiled of sightings and experiences by people in New York and Connecticut. In the next episode, we'll be diving into witness accounts dealing with what people refer to as high strangeness. Things like telepathy, observations of non-human entities, and something people rarely like to talk about, abductions. Until then, see you next time on Catskill Liminal Walk.